From Washington, D.C. this morning is Senator Tom Cotton. Senator, thank you very much and welcome back to the program.
Hey, Bob. It's great to be on with you again.
Real quick, been doing anything interesting up there? And naturally, I jest because you have been you've been very busy. We want to get to as much of it as we possibly can this morning. First up, on Thursday, the Senate voted on a bill to give Congress oversight on the Iran nuclear deal. The vote 98-1. You're the lone no vote. First, why don't you explain the opposition to the bill?
Well, Bob, I'm afraid this legislation is not going to give Congress the oversight that it needs, and in the end could allow President Obama to claim that Congress blessed a very dangerous nuclear agreement with an Islamist terrorist sponsoring regime in Iran. Any nuclear arms agreement, especially with an adversary that sponsors terror, should be submitted to the Congress as a treaty. At a minimum, we should have an up or down vote to approve the deal. Unfortunately, this legislation turns that constitutional rule on its head, which means we have to get a two-thirds vote to block any deal from going forward. The president, in other words, only has to get 34 senators to stay with him, and he can move forward with what is going to be a very dangerous nuclear deal with Iran if it's ultimately consummated. And there's no real power in this legislation that Congress didn't already have. We can certainly bring legislation to the floor at any time to try to stop this kind of international agreement. We would have had, or this bill does prevent sanctions from being lifted for 30 days, but we're talking about a nuclear agreement that could have a lifetime of 10 to 15 years. And I just don't think the Congress should stand for this kind of constitutional usurpation by the president when we should be submitting any kind of agreement as a treaty with a two-thirds vote to approve.
Going a little bit deeper on this, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell ended debate on this fairly abruptly early on in the week, and there were reports that some members of your own party were frustrated by your efforts to add amendments to the bill. Have things changed since you and 46 of your fellow Republicans have signed that letter to the Iranian regime?
Well, Bob, I work very closely with the Majority Leader, Senator McConnell, and all of my Republican colleagues. The only reason debate had to be closed without more amendments is the Democratic Party senator's stubbornness on this issue. Senator McConnell is always going to face the same choice. Democrats were not going to allow votes on certain amendments, like the amendment I offered to ensure Iran had closed its underground hardened nuclear bunker, or that it's submitted to fully verifiable inspections. They were not going to allow a vote on Senator Rubio's amendment to say that Iran had to recognize Israel's right to exist before they get relief from the sanctions imposed upon them. So I don't disagree with what Senator McConnell did. I disagree with what Senate Democrats have done to block amendments on very important policies that would have strengthened this legislation and strengthened a final deal with Iran.
And some of this leads to, we'll get to another topic here, but Christina Peterson writes in the Wall Street Journal, and this is about you. Long gone are the days when Senate freshmen were expected to keep their heads down and mouths closed for their few months in office. Evident of that, and that leads to a headline in Washington Times. Senator delivers the ugly truth. Islamic State seems to be winning right now. Given the shooting in Dallas last weekend, not too terribly far from Arkansas, fortunately two extremists were killed, averting tragedy there. Do you feel that we have completely underestimated this group on our home turf?
Unfortunately, Bob, President Obama did clearly underestimate the Islamic State. It wasn't too long ago that he was referring to the Islamic State as the JV team. Now they control as much territory and have more wealth and have more arms than perhaps any terrorist group in modern times. And they are clearly trying to recruit Americans to launch terrorist attacks against American citizens in our homeland. In fact, it's well known that they encourage their recruits overseas in North America and Western Europe not to travel to Iraq or to Syria and become tainted by that travel, but rather to stay in their homes, plot attacks, and try to kill Americans in our homeland. The plot in Dallas is still being investigated. Whether it was Islamic State directed or resourced or planned, it was clearly inspired by the Islamic State, and the Islamic State is gaining followers around the world, in part because it is perceived as winning in Iraq and Syria and gaining more adherents to its totalitarian view of Islam and its desire to impose its vision on the world.
What's being discussed in Congress about trying to fight that or thwart that here at home before it gets to the point where these guys put on body armor and grab guns and go after folks?
Well, Bob, we have an amazing group of men and women who serve in our military, and our intelligence agencies who are working day and night to stop exactly this kind of attack. Many times they're successful, and Americans don't know of their successes. I do, because I sit on the intelligence in the Armed Services Committee. But I can assure you that those professionals are working day and night to try to stop these attacks. Unfortunately, they're sometimes having their hands tied by executive branch policymakers, up to and including the president, who is putting too many measures in place to stop us from taking the fight to the terrorists. We should be fighting them on a home turf in the Middle East and around the world, not letting them fight us on our home turf here in the United States.
All right, I want to quickly move on to earlier this week, you also introduced the Ensuring Seniors Access to Local Pharmacies Act, basically making sure that our seniors have access to prescription drugs and services that they get at the local community pharmacy. This has bipartisan support, so I'm sure you're happy to hear that. Why is this so important?
Well, Arkansas has many seniors who depend on Medicare Part D, the prescription drug program, but also live in rural areas all across the state that are really underserved. They don't have large pharmacies like a CVS or Walgreens or Walmart. They depend on their local community pharmacist, who oftentimes is the only health care provider or expert in their community. Now, the Medicare prescription drug program can negotiate preferred rates with large pharmacies, and if you live close to one of those pharmacies, that's great. It saves you money, and it also saves the taxpayer money. What our legislation would say is that any small independent pharmacist can also join that kind of preferred network without getting any more favorable terms or prices and without additional negotiations. They simply have to be willing to accept the terms that larger pharmacy chains have negotiated, and then they can provide the same cost savings to their local customers as well as to the taxpayer in their community. And given how rural many parts of our states are, I think this is a critical improvement for strengthening health care for seniors in Arkansas.
Not that you've got enough on your plate as it is, but on a much lighter note, you and your wife, Anna, have a beautiful baby boy, Gabriel. Tell us how life is at home, not that you're busy enough, as I mentioned.
Well, Gabriel has been a great blessing. We named him after the angel Gabriel, who brought the good news, because he's certainly our little angel who brought great news into our life. And he keeps us busy. I've learned how to change diapers and use the bottle and rock him to sleep, but he's doing very well at night. Anna only has to get up once a night to feed him, so we're already happy that he's getting close to sleeping through the night. But we're just having a ton of fun. It's a true blessing to be parents to such a beautiful little baby boy.
I tell you what, I have a 7, soon-to-be 8-year-old daughter. I know you hear this from every parent out there. Cherish every moment, because time is about to fly. You go into warp speed.
Well, lots of parents warned us about the sleepless nights and the dirty diapers and the fussiness. What they didn't tell us is that none of it would matter once we saw that little baby.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter at all. Senator, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Certainly appreciate your time.
Thanks, Bob.